Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and today I want to introduce you to a new style of bassline. I mean, it's not a new style of bassline, but I want to continue what I did a few weeks ago when I introduced you to the Moroder bassline, which was a very basic bassline formula. And today there's another basic bassline formula that I want you to learn, which is called the dotted bassline. Let me show you an audio example first. Imagine in Ableton we've got a basic drum loop, something like this. And then we add a dotted bassline, it's going to sound something like this. Okay, let's talk about the name of this bassline first. It's called a dotted bassline because in classical music notation, you write notes that look like this or like this, and you can put little dots next to them to indicate that those notes should be played 50% longer than their original length. So imagine you take, for example, 1/8 note, which looks like this, and you put a little dot next to it. That means that it's 1/8 note, but played 50% longer than 1/8 note. So if you think of 1/8 note as 2/16 notes next to each other, then the length of this is 3/16 notes. So in summary, a dotted bassline is nothing more than a bassline that's being played in clusters of 3/16 notes, or for example in the alternate version you can also do 3/8 notes. You can tweak this formula obviously however you like, but let's stick to the basics for now because it's a very common pattern and it's great to have this in your tool belt. So let's hop into Ableton now, where I'll show you quickly how to program a dotted bassline like this. And then there was some questions in my Foundations of Electronic Music course from people about wavetable synthesis. So let's go into that together for a moment and look at some sound design options that you have using wavetable synthesis. See you on the other side. All right, imagine we're in Ableton and we've got this very simple project set up here. It is simply a 606 core kit, nothing changed about it. And I've programmed bass drum, hi-hat, 4 to the floor in a 1-bar loop. Just like this. This is our metronome so that we understand what the grid is, so that we understand how time ticks along in this project. So now let's create a new MIDI track, and on that MIDI track, put a little placeholder sound, just an operator. I put this on there because we're not sound designing. Right now we're just programming where we want the notes to fall in time, right? So we're going to make a little clip and we're going to have a little closer look at our timeline. We're going to choose a very straightforward note like C. And what we're going to do is make sure that our grid is in 1/16th. And we're going to program clusters of 3/16th notes, which is the same as a dotted 8th note. So 1, there, there. Notice how it's 1 on, 2 off, 1 on, 2 off. So it's going to sound like these are this length. But I like them to be just very short so that we get a little punchy beep. There we go. So imagine now this would sound like... Perfect. You can add this one or put it there. This is a very versatile starting point because you don't have to stick to this literally. You can, of course, add in variations and turnarounds at the end, or for example, even change the length of the notes. So for example, instead of doing 3/16th notes, we can go to 1/8 note and instead do clusters of 3/1/8 notes like this. Let's go back to 1/16th note. We can make this clip twice as long, for example, and just copy this stuff over. And the longer that this clip is going to be, the longer that our musical phrase is going to be, the more this is going to feel somehow like a polymeter. So if you're not familiar with the concept of polymeters, watch this video right here. But the difference between this and a polymeter is that every 2 bars, this is going to reset back on the 1. The first note is going to play on the start of the drum phrase as well. Whereas with a real polymeter, the pattern would continue on here, leaving 2 gaps and then repeating from there. So now, like in the Moroder video, let's program in some notes on this. And so let's duplicate the length of this and pretend that this is going to be a 2-chord progression. And I'm going to start on the A and I'm going to move to the F, simply because In the major scale, that's the 6 chord, or the root note of the 6 chord, and the root note of the 4 chord, which go very well together and make it feel like a kind of a minor feeling. Let me hit play. Cool. Now you might have noticed that in many other compositions, here there'll be another chord change. So for example, you might move this down again and then see how this feels. So 2 bars of the same chord, 1 bar of another chord, 1 bar of another chord. I quite like this. I think this is cool. And remember that you can always spice things up with turnarounds as well. So remember this video on turnarounds, where basically at the end of a musical phrase, adding in something unexpected can really spice things up. So for example, let's add in a few notes for the turnaround here. Other notes from the A minor chord. So, and here other notes from the F major chord. So let's put that there. And then over here, another little turnaround. So let's put that one there and that one there. And see how this feels. There we go. In my Foundations of Electronic Music course, I call this a plucked bass line because it's kind of like plucking it on a bass guitar, but I somehow feel like the dotted bass line is a better name for it. And if we want to do even some more spicy stuff, maybe we can add a little bit of groove and swing to this. And so the easiest way to do that is to go over here to grooves and to try out a few different grooves. And so what we would just do is drag these on here, and invisibly these grooves are now affecting where these notes are placed on the grid and their relative velocities. You can see here on the bottom left that it says Groove Funk Modern now. And if we wanted to see exactly what the effect was, we would just hit Effect, and now you can actually see what it's doing. But let's undo that and just let it do its work invisibly and listen to what this feels like. It's quite intense. It's quite intense. We can make it more subtle if we want by reducing the velocity amount and the timing amount. And all we've done now is kind of humanize this a bit so that not everything falls exactly on the grid and not everything has the exact same velocity. That's kind of cool. We could audition a whole bunch of different ones by simply moving them. But right now my composition is so sparse that I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to come back here to Funk Modern, leave it on there, and I'm going to move on to the sound design phase. So for the sound design, I got a question from a student about wavetable synthesis. They thought that they would learn one type of synthesis to start with, and as such, they thought that maybe starting with wavetable synthesis was a good place to start. And what I want to tell you first of all is, don't start with wavetable synthesis as the first type of synthesis that you learn. Start with subtractive synthesis. Learn first how an oscillator works, how a filter works, and how an amplifier works, and how you can affect those three things with envelopes and LFOs. And once you've got that really deep in your mind, then you can branch out comfortably to some other synthesis types like wavetable synthesis. Because if you know subtractive synthesis, then wavetable synthesis is nothing more than subtractive synthesis, but with a whole lot more options at the level of the oscillator, where the oscillator can have much more interesting shapes than just a sawtooth or a square wave, which is the classic subtractive synthesis kind of sound palette. So in wavetable synthesis, you can have really interesting wave shapes that morph a little bit over time. But then again, it just goes straight into a filter and into an amplifier, just like in subtractive synthesis. Let me show you that now. If we go into Ableton's Wavetable Synthesizer right here, and we hit play, we're just hearing a sine wave going through a filter that's really open through an amplifier, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to a sawtooth wave, which is now too bright, which we're going to reduce with the filter. We're going to create a little pluck sound by adding an envelope to the filter. And the envelope to the filter we're going to do by putting envelope 2, turning it into a little pluck shape. And then we're going to go into the matrix, and we're going to affect this by like 40% or something. Watch my videos on subtractive synthesis and how to learn any synth if any of this is mysterious to you, because you should be able to follow this, because this is just basic subtractive synthesis. And let's listen to the result of the subtractive synthesis. That's already very cool. Very simple. Now let's add in the magic of the wavetable synthesizer, which is that instead of a sawtooth or a square wave, what we're going to do is we're going to go not to the basic shapes. We're not even going to go to this basics collection. We're going to go to something ridiculous like format. And then we're just going to hit play and see what this sounds like. We're going to move the wavetable around, see if we find any sweet spots. And I don't like any of this. And one thing we can do when everything sounds too bright is play an octave lower. So we would just go literally into the notes, do Control or Command A, hold down Shift and the down arrow, and again, too low. Okay, Shift Tab to move back to this view. Not bad. And so all we've got is a basic like an oscillator that's a different shape than the basic shapes. And then if you want to use some of the magic of wavetable synthesis, one of the cool things is that you can automate with envelopes the position. See here, oscillator 1 position. I can automate it with the envelope just the way that I'm automating the filter frequency. So you see this kind of pluck? Weird, right? I'm not against this sound. Remember that we have this drum loop which is completely unsound designed and doesn't sound particularly good. So maybe that's letting our composition down a bit. Let me maybe turn it off for now. Okay, let's keep looking for a better sweet spot. Oh, I like it. I like this a lot. Cool. And now, just like in subtractive synthesis, we can ask ourselves the question, do we want to, for example, put some unison on this? Maybe a little bit of unison. Maybe we want it to be monophonic. Maybe we want to put some glide on there. The glide isn't working because we're not in the right mode. But that's okay. Ooh, an even deeper filter, 24 decibels per octave. I think that's what that is. And then we can choose a different filter model here, one with some drive, just like in subtractive synthesis. Sounding good. Let's put some delay on this, huh? Let's put some delay. It's going to be awesome. So let's put some ping pong on that delay and make sure we only grab the high frequencies of that. Like, let's say like kind of some mid frequencies. You don't want the sub frequencies to be bouncing around in the ping pong. It's kind of cool. Well, actually, this is a bad length for a delay because it is the same length as our notes. So let's take a different length. Here we go. That's cool. Nice. And now let's put some reverb on there as well. Some Valhalla Room. Some people shame me for putting reverb on bass. I don't care. If it sounds tasty, it is tasty. There we go. That's pretty sweet. That's pretty sweet. And now instead of the 606 core kit, which sounds really thin and weak, let's instead put on just a solid kick drum 4 to the floor. Okay, so cool. I spent some time sound designing some of this, so I added in a bit of a tougher kick. Then I added in some drums from Reason. It's got that redrum drum machine. Pretty tough electro 2000 sounds. Love it. Then just a little bit of a sound bed using the chords that are behind the root note of the bass line, and then a pad. Very cool. And this is the basis for a track, for example. And now let's use F1 and F2 to mute all the lows. There we go. Not bad. Not bad. If you want to learn how to make compositions like this, follow my Foundations of Electronic Music course. It takes you from absolute beginner until the point where you can pretty easily make compositions like this and then even further make some arrangements with them. Come show us on our Discord channel what you did with this. And until next time, stay producing, be good to one another, and take care. Bye bye.